Welcome back to another edition of Research Fantasy presents our NBA Fantasy Baller DFS edition for Tuesday, April 18th, 2017. It is tax day. I don't know what that has to do with daily fantasy, but these are the kind of things that rattle off my head when I roll out of bed and onto your camera. So, playoff formatting is being done a little bit differently. Previously, we were given top 3 tournament plays, top 3 value plays. Not really appropriate in a playoff setting here with things kind of so, very specific. It kind of sounds like a stupid thing to say, but it's, you're going to kind of see after 2 and 3 games here, and you should pretty much know who you're focusing on as it is. So we'll go game by game. I'll give you my takes on things. And we'll hopefully have a combination of the winning lineup in there somewhere. I know that we would have last night my lineup, even though I was just playing in free contests because I just don't really want to risk money on 2 games. I know that it finished very high. It almost cashed in all the free contests, but you get to the point in the year where it's hard to differentiate from your opponents. Especially if everybody's thinking the same things that end up coming true. It ends up being a very, very, very difficult operation to try to set yourself apart. So let's start out with the Milwaukee Bucks taking on the Toronto Raptors. Bucks escaped with a victory, kind of shocking a lot of people. I mean, the Bucks, to me, the teams that I think really give teams trouble, and I thought the Bucks were one of them until Jabari Parker went down, but the length that they have with their starting 5 and then Monroe coming off the bench is absolutely insane. Thon Maker, definitely not a solid basketball player yet, but he'll get there. You're looking at the usual suspects. You're going to hear me say that pretty much like every time we do a video here, that you're looking at the usual suspects. And I mean, it's going to start with me for Giannis. It's tough for these guys in a playoff format to break these big games. We saw last night Paul George had to do everything in his power just to hit 50 fantasy points. I think that's a case where Giannis could do that tonight, but I think he's got enough guys around him that I would expect him to be around that mid-40 mark. At his price, just not enough. And again, I have FanDuel open right now. Just looking at that, I don't feel like paying 10-7 for a guy who I think is going to get me like 45 to 46 fantasy points. I'd rather look elsewhere. Some of the elsewhere that I don't mind looking whatsoever, I think Malcolm Brogdon is priced reasonably. I mean, 5,600 is getting a little bit high for him. I think there's still some room for upside. Conversely, the next 2 guys, Chris Middleton and Greg Monroe, I feel like they're still priced just a little bit too low. Monroe priced at 5,900, which sees him needing just under 30 fantasy points. Same with Monroe. I think both of those guys are good bets to hit 6x, 5x value. There's not going to be many guys, if any guys, you'll see hitting 6x value. So that's where I'd go tonight. If you're really needing to go cheap somewhere, Tony Snell, solid player. He's going to see minutes. His production is just going to fluctuate. Yes, he may end up with a 30-point fantasy game in this series. He may end up with a 3-point fantasy game after that. So, moving on from there, let's go to the Toronto side of the ball. It comes down to 3 players, DeMar DeRozan, Serge Ibaka, and Kyle Lowry. And Lowry was awful in Game 1. I think he shot something like 1 of 21 or something absolutely ridiculous, maybe 1 of 13. I don't know what it was, but it was bad. It was very, very, very bad. A lot of people will be off him tonight. I don't mind zagging a little bit off of, who I think will be the obvious plays and going with Lowry, because people will be like, well, I'm not playing that scrub. It gives you a chance to differentiate. DeRozan, where he's at, still think there's upside there, even though with a strong scoring game, he still didn't come close to hitting value. Greg Monroe did go over. Quite frankly, no one else is seeing enough minutes or doing enough that it really warrants me looking at them in my lineups tonight. So if I had to rank them, I'd probably go DeRozan, Lowry, Ibaka. Maybe even Lowry ahead of DeRozan just to try to benefit from those people who are going to stay off of him because they think he's a bum. All right, let's move on to the biggest upset of the opening round thus far, and that has been Chicago over Boston. I am not a believer that Chicago is going to be able to continue their run. Jimmy Butler, he's just too priced out where he's at, 10K. Again, just like Giannis, he's a guy who's going to return value in the mid-40s, and if everyone else struggles and it only returns 4.5 times value, that's fine. But the second you start getting players, especially more expensive ones, like with Chris Paul and Isaiah Thomas, who I think are pretty good bets to do that, you're in a tough position. You're spending that 10K to get 4.5 times value, just doesn't end up making up for it. On the flip side of things, I think that Rondo, I think that Wade are still priced at a position where both of those guys could see 5x value. Bobby Portis, definitely a wild card here, played decently down the stretch, had a very nice first game. His price came up as well, but he fits the mold of someone who should succeed against his Boston team. I don't mind throwing him out there in your contest tonight. But that's pretty much where I'm sticking to it. I just don't... The starters are getting enough run that they should be able to put together pretty strong games. In my opinion, no need to look past any of them. I'm sorry for all the yawning. I literally just got up and rolled out of bed. Boston side of the ball, Isaiah Thomas appears likely to play. Had a very strong first game. Price didn't move up too much on FanDuel. He and Horford, basically the guys that got things done. Everyone else fell really short. So I don't think that that's a situation where it's going to happen again. I do feel like both Marcus Smart and Avery Bradley end up just a little bit overpriced for where I want to pay. I think I'm fine with Jay Crowder just because he's capable of putting together more well-rounded stat lines, and he's going to see the minutes. And then I don't mind Kelly Olynyk because, he's 3-point shot. If that gets falling, they'll sacrifice Amir Johnson to play Olynyk, and I think that's a good move, really. Olynyk is a power forward that can stretch the floor. Now, Horford can shoot the 3 too. He doesn't need to, but Horford provides a better, more stable body under the rim to collect rebounds and putbacks and, play defense. So I think this is going to be a little bit of a different game. Wouldn't be surprised if it's close still, but all things considered, those are the plays I like. Isaiah Thomas is still my favorite from this team. Moving on to Utah at the Clippers. I said in the first podcast, the Jazz are the sneaky team here, and it stinks because Gobert has to be a part of that. This team does not sneak by anyone playing Diaw at the 4 and Favors at the 5, or even Johnson at the 4 and Favors at the 5. It's just not the same dynamic. That team doesn't make it. Might it make past the Clippers? It could, but there's not getting past the Spurs. So with that said, I think they would play the Spurs. I'm just kind of spitballing. I don't know where they'd fall in. Maybe they might fall in. Yeah, it's too early to tell where they'd fall in there, but for me, I don't want to be the guy who's trying to just pick up off of one guy's performance from a previous game, but Joe Johnson's underpriced. 4,600. Got the minutes minus Gobert. Definitely a guy I could see exceeding value. And most of the reason he makes it on here is just because even though I think Gordon Hayward stands a better chance of being the focus of the team, more so with Gobert out, price is just up there. They're going to... If it came down to me as a coach defending Hayward or Joe Johnson, I'm going to let Joe Johnson beat me every single time. I'm not going to let Gordon Hayward beat me because I think at this point in his career, Hayward has just much better skill set to do that. So I think that Joe Johnson at his price should see enough run, should see enough time on the court that he is able to do what he needs to do to get those fantasy points. And the price is good on FanDuel, 46. I haven't even looked to see where he's at on DraftKings, but I don't mind paying that whatsoever. Falling behind him, not a lot I really like in terms of this Jazz team. I guess Joe Ingles is priced fair enough that I could see warranting a spot in your lineup with him. George Hill, still very much underpriced at $5,700. I know he did not have the greatest first game, but talent's there. Definitely a guy I'm looking at tonight, no questions asked. I mean, this guy came through in the clutch so many times in the year at low ownership, and I think with the crowd probably, gravitating towards Chris Paul and Isaiah Thomas at the position, I could definitely see, George Hill being a nice pivot from that. Moving on to the Clippers, like I've said, I mean, Chris Paul pops as being a guy who should just be able to dominate this series. One of the few guys going over 5x, way over 5x in his first game. I think that he's got the potential to do that all series. Something to me just doesn't feel right about Blake Griffin right now. Even without Rudy Gobert, DeAndre Jordan was not getting it done. So all things considered, I mean, Paul seems like the most stable force on this team. Blake's definitely a guy at any point in time who could come back and put up a 50-point fantasy game. This isn't what we're saying whatsoever. It's just that I feel much more comfortable with Chris Paul. Though this could be a situation where maybe I flop, Paul for George Hill, flop Ibaka for Blake Griffin, and just say, all right, now I'm going to play the variance game here. And, maybe Paul's the one who does far more assisting than he does scoring. And, benefit from the low ownership of George Hill. And maybe some people might not be on Blake as much because Favors is cheaper, Ibaka is cheaper, Portis is cheaper, and you might be able to score a couple of extra ownership points there. The last guy I'll mention is the least sexy player in the NBA in terms of, wanting to put him in your roster. But I really don't mind it because, like I said, some of these series, you're going to have guys like Tony Snell, these defensive grinders who, get put in positions where they're seeing so many minutes that they just accidentally trip and fall into production. And that's Luke Ricard and Ba Mute. Seriously, the least exciting type of player to put in your lineups because he's absolutely everywhere. No idea what his production is going to look like, but if you look at the game log, it's been trending in the right direction. Nothing that really jumps out at you, but I think he's got the potential to hit 20 fantasy points. And just being honest, on these days where it's tough to find that, if you find the one guy who's able to do that and he doesn't carry a high ownership percentage, you're going to be ahead of the game just about everywhere else, to be quite honest with you. So I don't mind him tonight. All right, thanks again for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Head over to researchfantasy.com. Sign up for our NBA mailing list. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Research and Win. And join us again tomorrow.